Let me say something that might annoy a few people, but it will save you years. You can self-teach a lot of technology. You can self-teach cloud services. You can self-teach how to code. You can even teach yourself how to pass many of the certifications out there, but you cannot self-teach architecture, and you will not be able to learn architecture on your own to a level that will make you consistently effective in a real world, real enterprise situation. And today I'm going to discuss why. See, when we talk about architecture, and whether we're talking about enterprise architecture, whether we're talking about cloud architecture, whether we're talking about security architecture, it's really a business role. Architecture is about making decisions that are going to shape outcomes in the client organization. So we're shaping outcomes across the business and the business's strategy, helping that organization manage risk, potentially as an enterprise architect, helping find the most efficient way for people to do their job with the best processes, for example, and even how to best utilize time, a strategic advantage. And that simply needs to be taught, just like surgery needs to be taught or flying an airplane needs to be taught. So here's the simplest definition that I can actually give you of the difference between, say, a cloud engineer and a cloud architect, and why you can learn some of these engineering things and why you can't. Engineering builds, and you can teach yourself how to build. But architecture is about making the decisions that are in the best interest of the business. Now, an engineer will build it, and the architects, we will decide what should be built, why it should be built, when it should be built, and what's going to be the cost, and what's the actual risk of the architecture, and the risk of doing nothing. And then we have to align that organization's strategic needs and then build in an execution plan and then somehow make sure that it gets done. So architecture is about choosing trade-offs, especially when not everyone agrees, because there's no perfect solution. Architecture is about when the requirements are incomplete, and that's nearly all the time. No matter how much information you get, there are going to be certain things that no one's ever done before. When the constraints are actually real, and when the cost of failure could be a 4-hour outage that could cost organizations millions of dollars, potentially loss of life if it was, say, a hospital system. Architecture matters, and that's why it's not just a tech skill. Architecture is a professional discipline, just like medicine and others. And that's my background is actually internal medicine. I was a nurse practitioner, and it's just like architecture, where someone comes to with a problem, we get information, we make a diagnosis, and then build a treatment plan. So the certification trap. And this is something I see all the time. Someone goes to the AWS website, they get an AWS certification, they do a whole bunch of hands-on videos. And then they tell me I'm trying to teach myself architecture. And I'm going to get a bunch of certifications, and they've watched tons of videos, tutorials. And listen, I'm not going to say that the certifications don't have any value, but the certifications are a great way to get interviews, but they don't teach anything related to actually architecture. Nearly all certification training is based on how to do something. How do you code? How do you configure an EC2 instance on AWS? How do you set up an IAM policy on AWS, for example? How would you deploy a Kubernetes cluster in Azure, in Google, in AWS? How would you connect one VPC to another, or one VNet to another, or configure a load balancer? That's engineering, and that you can learn real well in a certification. And that's very useful to our engineers. It's great, but it has nothing to do with architecture, because how to configure an EC2 instance is not the same as how does the technology actually work, which we architects need to know. Just like a doctor needs to know the way the medication works, we architects need to know all of the underlying technology and how it works, and then also where it would fit into the equation of helping our business do better. We architects are concerned about how the technology will behave at scale, how the technology will fail if and when it fails, because all technology fails. Will the technology increase our risk, or will the technology or the architecture decrease our risk? What will the financial impact of the technology be into both, say, things like revenue, as well as things like technology costs? And how will the technology fit into a comprehensive technology strategy? So as you can see, these are very, very different. See, certifications tend to talk about features and steps, But architecture requires system thinking. What happens when one thing happens in one part of the system to the other part of the system? Architecture requires professional judgment. So it's a discipline much more like medicine, and that's why it has to be taught. And let's get real about what we typically do as enterprise architects, or even, a cloud architect that's in a fairly senior level position. Or even most architects in general, we manage stakeholders across the business, across the IT departments, security, finance, product, what have you. We're all delivering executive presentations that are going to drive decisions inside of our organization. We architects are all leading architecture teams because no one architect's ever going to design an enterprise environment. It could be 30, 40, 50, or 100 or more of us that are part of these teams. And then we'll typically set standards that will both enable delivery, get things done faster, but also put some governance in and not over-govern. We architects are typically focused on reducing an enterprise's risk. And some of that is part of security, some of that's part of compliance, some of that's in the architecture and the resilience and the availability that's designed, and also the risks of the various vendors that we're working with. So we architects are building business cases, with cost, value, and trade-offs to say that this new solution you want to buy that costs $1 billion will pay for itself in 2 years because of this, this, and this. Respond to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, and that way we can send things to vendors and the vendors can respond to it. The vendors' architects will respond. And then ultimately, we have to sell the architecture to the C-suite. Here's why I'm recommending you spending an additional $50 million on this, including $5 million of personnel, $10 million of security hardware, $10 million of this. And it's going to do this to your risk. And if you don't invest in it, here's what your actual risk is. So somewhere along the line, we've got to go to the C-suite. And that's part of why this is a professional discipline. Now, we create all kinds of architecture artifacts that will align teams, organizations' roadmaps, capability maps of what the organization has, what we're going to in the future state. We're creating architecture decision references and many other types of documents. So, see, none of that is something that you just click a few boxes on an AWS management console or an Azure management console or configuring a few commands in a Cisco router. What we're talking about as architects is influence, it's communication, it's organizational leadership. That's architecture. Now, here's the part people really don't want to hear, but we have to talk about it anyway. The things that architects do cannot be learned on the job. I'll give you an analogy to show you how important the architect's job is. If the architect is designing a system for a hospital and that hospital goes down and people die because the hospital goes down, that architect is caused harm to many people along the way, even though they didn't mean to, with the bad architecture. Now, if it's a physician doesn't know how to do surgery, you can't let them learn on you. They have to be with another physician, for example, and be taught. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you'll design an architecture that will go down, cause a business harm, and potentially harm life. So architecture is not something you learn on the job. And that's why in medicine, in airplane pilots, and even the architects I train that are now working all over, they're trained first. We practice in a controlled environment. Whether we're practicing medicine, whether it's architecture and we're training someone, we're coaching people along the way. We basically bring in something and we can reevaluate it along the way because that's architecture. That's how you build architecture skills. No one knows how to do surgery on their own. No one knows how to design an enterprise architecture for an organization with 200,000 people on their own. It's just not something we were born with. And that's why we're here, because a bad architecture can create a multi-years of problems and instability for the long term. They can lock a company into the wrong vendor for the wrong reason. It can create security incidents, and it can stall future changes in the architecture. So it matters, and it really matters. Not alone could it can waste millions or billions of dollars. So that's the thing that I want you to get here, that architecture is just not something you can learn on the job. This is a critical job. It's why it pays an executive salary, and it's an executive role in every way. So you have to be able to do the job when you get there. Now, another key that's different between, say, cloud engineering and cloud architecture or enterprise architecture is that architecture is more of an art and a science, just like medicine. And you can learn some of these science things on your own. You can learn about architecture frameworks on your own. You can learn about various architecture patterns, for example. And you can learn various security concepts and networking fundamentals on your own. You can self-study that. But the art of architecture, that's the secret to the magic. That's the secret to what we do. And that's the part that needs to be taught. The art of walking in and being able to read the room and the customer to see what they're truly saying, even when they don't say too much. Identifying who the right decision maker is, managing conflict between your team members that are working for you or potentially various stakeholders inside the client, navigating politics without having to become too political. When we describe an architecture to the client so they can make an ultimate decision, we have to be able to present trade-offs and not have an ego or a preference between any of our architectures other than recommending what we have, why we're recommending it, and then trade-offs of each alternative considered. We have to influence without a lot of authority. So you have to convince the C-suite and the board, for example, to be able to spend what's necessary for your architecture. You'll have to create cultural change. Anytime you create a new architecture, you have to get the organization and stakeholders buy-in. And so there's a lot that goes through that. And you'll be having to keep your teams moving and motivated. So this isn't something you learn by watching another tutorial. This is learned by guided practice and feedback and simulations and real case studies and role plays back and forth. And learning from someone else that's already done it, that's already made the mistakes that you don't ever want to make. Because that's why architecture needs to be taught. So if you self-teach and you're not getting it where you're going is, I want you to think about what's going on. So do you know how to communicate to the CFO about the things that they're concerned about? Do you know how to communicate to the Chief Information Security Officer about the things that they're worried about? Are you going to be able to frame the problem, propose options to the client, quantify the trade-offs? Okay, we have this trade-off, and that's about $1 billion to us long term. We've got this trade-off, and that might enhance revenue by this, but it causes this risk. We have to put numbers behind these so the executives can make a decision. We have to build business cases. I mean, nobody wakes up and says, can I spend $1 billion on technology? But if you can build a real business case that shows that $1 billion investment will yield $3 billion in the future, they'll invest in it. But you need to build those business cases. And that's the art of architecture. It's not a lab exercise. It's not a high stakes performance skill where you're doing on the job. This is planning. And that's what we do. We're not really performers, we're planners. And all this requires training. So what does it mean when I say architecture means taught? It means you need to learn things like decision-making frameworks, how to choose when information is incomplete, understanding true risk thinking, and being able to convey it into dollars and cents terms. So things like threat modeling, resilience, compliance, building those business cases like I was talking about, managing stakeholders to map influence, build coalitions, handle conflict, what have you, navigating an architecture practice, potentially creating architectural review boards, creating standards, guidelines, governance, and things, and knowing how to create the capability maps of a business or artifacts that we need and business architectures and value streams, and not only know how to create them, but know how to optimize them for the business and the business's ultimate goal. So here's my advice. This is exactly what I would recommend doing. Keep learning the science. Keep getting valuable certifications. Now that means things like TOGAF 10 or the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, or the CISSP for security architects, or the CCDE for network architects. These are good certifications. They really are. And they will get you more interviews. But that's not going to get you there. Get architecture training that will teach you the art of architecture. Get the coaching, get the feedback, and get the real life skills. So then when you go there, you can actually give the client what they need. And that's what I did. When I left internal medicine for tech when I was a nurse practitioner 25 years ago, I got the real skills, and then I got the certifications, and I was a principal architect within 2 years, and you can too. So that's really what I want you to understand. So if this video helped you, please like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell to be notified of new videos. And if you'd like to become an architect, what I'd like you to do is join me on a free architecture webinar. We hold, generally speaking, 2 free architecture webinars per week, live on Zoom. We'll go over what we do as an architect, for example, various roles like security architects, cloud architects, enterprise architects, AI architects. We'll talk about 100% of the skills that you actually need. We'll talk about the 5 steps to going from one job to another and working ultimately as an architect. We'll tell you what hiring managers want, and we'll tell you everything that you need to do, including the kinds of things that should be in your architect portfolio, and it's free. And you can register for the free architecture webinars by clicking the webinar link in the description of this video. And then we'll send you the next webinar email for the next webinar, and you'll be invited. Also, in the description of this video, in addition to the free webinars that you can talk about, and obviously I'll answer any questions you have about architecture careers live and free on Zoom, we also have other free resources in the description of this video. Free resources on becoming a cloud architect, or free resources on becoming an AI architect, or even free resources on how to win the architecture interview for cloud architect roles, security architect roles, AI architect roles, and others. And it's all free, so sign up while you're in the description of this video, and some will be emailed to you. This is Mike Gibb signing off for now. I will be creating another architecture video and seeing you soon. Take care, everyone.